Hi, my name is Alexia Nagy, and this is my honors presentation entitled Fighting Back. So, my focus is on smaller areas within the Midwest that are fighting back for justice for the environment in various ways. So, we have, to start off, Osceola Township, which is a small town of only 900, and so the residents in this area are fighting a battle against Nestle. So, Nestle is a really big company, as we all know, and so the issue is Nestle is taking water from Twin Creek in the area for their Ice Mountain bottled water. So Nestle wants to build a booster station to increase the amount of water they're withdrawing from the creek, but residents are opposed to that because they claim that the water levels of the creek are lower and it's no longer supporting trout because of increased temperature, and so this is affecting the community in a negative way. The Nestle scientists disagree and are pointing at other factors, but the issue is no actual third-party research has been done, and big corporations, I'm sure, aren't above twisting data for their favor. So what's being done about this is a judge had originally approved Nestle for building the booster station, but then the residents fought against this and made an appeal, and so the appeal is going to be heard by the Michigan Court of Appeals, and that's a really big step, and so helping them is this global nonprofit, Some of Us, and they're helping to cover legal costs. They've donated $50,000 to help this small community in this legal battle, which is a very sizable amount, especially for just a town of 900 who are fighting against a mega corporation. So, unfortunately, I don't have any results from this yet because the battle is still ongoing, but as Some of Us said in part of the article that I read, they're helping this community because it's kind of a David versus Goliath fight, and this is would be such a win for smaller local areas, especially because big companies are prone to just paying their way through things and to get their way, and this would be a great example of that not turning out in their favor. And one of the issues is Nestle and other water companies tend to just, especially in Michigan, can come into an area and take as much water as they want and only pay a fee that's hundreds of dollars, or not a fee, but just pay hundreds of dollars to draw as much water as they want, which would mega corporation who's gaining millions in sales, or maybe even billions, from the sale of bottled water, hundreds is like pennies to them. So the fact that this company is fighting against this and is getting the support is really good. So next, I'm going to talk about 48217. So 48217 is a zip code for an area in Detroit, and it is the most polluted area in Michigan. So of the 5 most populated, most polluted zip codes in Michigan, this is number 1. It's got way above average statistics for people who are hospitalized, people who are sick, people who have certain diseases and stuff like that, and the Michigan average is already above the national average in terms of some certain kinds of sickness, and then this specific zip code is just way far above even the Michigan average. And so some of the causes for this is the fact that they're just being exposed to so much hazardous materials. So there's 1.6 million pounds of hazardous chemicals that are released in the area from coal factories and steel production and salt mining and tar sands refining, which has been very bad for the community. So what's being done about this is Jenny Lee is an executive director of Allied Media Productions, so she's fighting to get residents access to the internet, low-cost access to the internet. So the issue is 48217 is it's in an area of Detroit, and the issue is a lot of the residents there are in the below the poverty line, or just really not well off, and so a lot of people are living paycheck to paycheck or just don't have reliable access to the internet or anything. And that makes it really hard for the community to be able to fight back and do something to better their lives because they don't know what can be done, and they already are too worried about being able to just live and survive without worrying about how they're going to get access to the internet and fight this whole big thing against these massive companies. And so this led to the Mesh Network. Jenny Lee had a hand in this. It aims to get residents in the area low-cost access to the internet. So what's good about this is that as a result, the people in the community can be more well-informed and can get organized now, which is a really big step toward making changes in the area. Unfortunately, solving this issue is going to be difficult because of the fact that there is limited internet access for so much of the population, and that it's in a low-income community, and low-income communities are frequently pushed to the side and disregarded in terms of any political action or legal action and stuff like that. And so this is still something that's going to have to be worked on. Next, I'm going to talk about the Straits of Mackinac. So, as a background, Enbridge has two 20-inch pipelines that run along the bottom of the straits, and they were built in 1953, and they transport 540,000 barrels of oil per day. And we talked about this a few times in class, and people also talked about it in their presentations. So we're pretty familiar with it by now. Line 5 as a whole has spilled more than 1 million gallons across its entire length, and that's not just limited to the straits, it's just across the entire thing. So one interesting thing I learned is that the Kalamazoo River oil spill was the largest inland spill in the nation, and that was directly because of Enbridge and Line 5. So Enbridge now wants to build a tunnel for Line 5 under the straits, which people are against that. And so the straits are a very ecologically sensitive area and carry a lot of water flow, and it's really important area for the health of those both lakes. So a spill could put hundreds of miles of coastlines at risk. And I have this YouTube video that kind of shows what would happen if okay, so this goes through, I'm just going to show a short bit of it, but it goes through what happens in the first few days. I think we'll take it to, I think I went to 10 and 20 days, and that got a pretty good estimate. Yeah, I think this is a really incredible video because it really shows the depth of what could happen. I mean, this is an entire coastline of Michigan that would be affected, as well as places like Mackinac Island and stuff like that. Just both lakes would absolutely be in big trouble. Okay, so alright, so we'll let it stop there. Oh dear. Ugh. Alright, so next, what's being done about this issue? So Indigenous people specifically are definitely at the forefront of the protests to protect this water and to keep this pipeline from staying in the straits, and then from also the tunnel being built. So also protesters from Standing Rock are also joining the group, and there was a camp set up that, as of August 2018 at least, and they were camped out and they would be staying as long as it takes till it's shut, which was something said by Nancy Shulman. She was a founder of the camp. So for 4 years, also another method of protest that's not this camping in protest is people have gone out into the lakes on canoes and rivers, and they hold up banners and their signs, and they just really call for change, really vocally that way. And it's not huge, I mean, but still hundreds of people show up, which for a protest, even on the water, is a pretty good deal. So people are really concerned for the impact the spill would have, but also like what this means for other Michigan waterways. Because if this company is allowed to come in and do really dangerous things or have the potential to be really harmful to one of the most sensitive and important areas in the Michigan lakes, and that doesn't bode well for our other bodies of water throughout the state, because we have, we have many lakes and we have many rivers. And so kind of if we take away protection from this one really big thing, how many little things then are going to be affected negatively also as a ripple effect. So there's also been criticisms of the lack of political action on this issue, which I can totally understand because it's definitely not something I feel like has been covered adequately. So next, I'm going to talk about this issue with wells in Wisconsin. So a recent study, as in January of 2019, showed that 42% of wells in a southwest Wisconsin area were too hazardous for drinking. So this was probably caused by like toxic fertilizer and then animal and human waste, which are two really big water pollutants. And the issue is a lot of the state draws from private wells, and so that's a big problem when the main water source for people is getting infected, and then people can't rely on their water. Recently in the past, I should say, In the eastern part of the state, new standards were passed to protect water from manure contamination, but the issue was there's this Wisconsin Dairy Business Association, and they were very much against these tighter rules because it would affect how the dairy farms operate with their manure and their cows and stuff. And so they were able to just keep these regulations limited to the eastern area. And given that it did happen pretty recently, new regulations haven't been put in effect, but they're getting there slowly. And then one thing that makes it also bad for groundwater contamination in Wisconsin is that there's fractured bedrock in the area and also thin soil, which means the soil doesn't really filter anything out, and so that can really make the groundwater easy to contaminate. So what's being done about this is that more tests are being ordered, and the counties have agreed to pay for this round of testing, which the public totally supports, which I understand. You want clean drinking water. Some conservationists are also arguing for the same regulations in the east to apply to southwest Wisconsin. So I think this would be a really good chance for that movement to make a really strong comeback because you have really strong arguments now. Because the reason for the contamination in the east part of the state and then the standards was pretty much the same as what was happening in what is happening in southwest Wisconsin. And so logically it just seems like those same protections and standards that are going to be set to the eastern area should also just be applied to southwest Wisconsin. So for the new rules, it affects how farmers are allowed to spread manure, and also it's going to be determined by bedrock and soil profile in the area. So it's not just going to be like a blanket statement. Like scientists are going to have to come in and do analyses and figure out what exactly needs to change. So the study is going to be completed in 2020 and will give us more information on what needs to be done specifically about this issue. So that is something that's going to be happening in the future, which is very good. Next is probably my favorite thing I learned about during this project is the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. So Lake Erie is one of our 5 Great Lakes, and it is the smallest and also the shallowest, which is bad because it's a really populated lake. It's in a very populated area. Toledo's right there. It's got Michigan right there. It also hits Canada. So what happens is it's super susceptible to pollution, and then every summer the lake gets these toxic algae blooms. And toxic algae blooms are very bad for lakes. It affects the wildlife. It affects the water temperature. It'll affect native species. It also affects the drinking water because it'll make the drinking water unsafe, and then can also harming the industry of the area because it'll harm tourism, and it just doesn't make it a fun lake, which nobody wants a lake that's no good for utilizing. So these toxic algae blooms are caused by runoff from farms of fertilizer and manure, so a lot of the issues that we saw also in Wisconsin. And then there's this quote by Marky Miller of Toledoans for Safe Water, which is, "We've been using the same laws for decades to try and protect Lake Erie. They're clearly not working." And I think that's a very fair statement, and it kind of shows how people are just fed up with the fact that we've had these laws, we've had regulations, and just it's very clearly not working. Like, something needs to change. And so, because of this, the pollution of the lake is a serious threat to pregnant women, children, and the elderly. Part of the article I read, a woman had visited her doctor, and he told her to not even, take a shower in the water that was being, pumped into her house because could be that potentially harmful to her or her baby, which is crazy that that's happening in 2019 when we're so advanced as a society now. It's just a really big problem. And so citizens of Toledo are very sick of this, and this led to the Lake Erie Bill of Rights. So this was really interesting because it essentially grants personhood status to the lake. So it's not going to be allowed to vote or anything, but citizens act as guardians of the lake and are allowed to sue polluters of the lake. So now if people see that a company is dumping too much waste or just doing something wrong by the water, they can go and sue that company and say, hey, you can't be polluting this lake, and they don't need to provide any personal injuries or anything, or how it's personally affecting them, or for whatever reason. I've never personally had to sue on behalf of a lake, so I wouldn't know how that would work. But you can just sue a polluter or company on the grounds of you can't be doing this to this lake because this lake doesn't deserve this. So this is a pretty aggressive bill, but smaller examples of it are found in other nations, mostly regarding smaller indigenous tribes that have sacred bodies of water or land, stuff like that. So Good news is that on February 28th of this year, the city voted in favor of granting permission to the lake, which gave the lake full legal rights. So this is a really big step, and it shows that people are really, I think, getting educated and really starting to take a stand on the state of our environment and the fact that they're no longer letting no longer letting big companies that pollute areas that are ecologically important or important for the community. I think that's a really good step because it shows that people are embracing the land around them and not just their immediate friends and family as part of their community now, and I think that's a really great step. So my takeaway is that the world is definitely full of a host of environmental issues. I mean, everybody knows that some studies from scientists have said that if we don't change our actions drastically by 2030, the world is going to irreversibly pretty much head toward the apocalypse. So there's lots of issues, and people are really becoming aware of that, especially because we're kind of in a time crunch now, which is very stressful, especially for people in my generation. So the good news is that, especially doing research on this project, is that I found out that there's still a lot of hope in the fact that people are fighting back and pushing for change. At the very least across the Midwest, but I'm very certain it's happening in other parts of the nation because we're all living in this nation, we all live in the environment. So I think it's really good that although there's still a lot of issues and I'm learning about a lot of issues, even if a whole community can't really get involved with something, like in the case of 48217, where a lot of community doesn't have internet access and stuff like that, then there's still people who are willing to fight for them who have the ability to. And that's also what happened kind of with Erie. The lake can't fight for itself, so people in the community stepped up and said, hey, wait, we're going to fight on behalf of this lake. And I think that's really good and gives me some hope for the future. So thank you for your time.